Ahoy-Boats sponsors great Continental river journeys. If you want to watch with subtitles, then click on the button on the left of this little group in the bottom right-hand corner. My name is Steve Walker.
And I'm Ewa Marcinkowska. And we are embarking on an adventure that will take us through Poland.
We'll be using this, our Nordic Explorer, which can take us to places that no road or rail traveller could even get to. We're going to row down the queen of Polish rivers, the last wild river in Europe, the River Wisła.
From outside the Krakow to Gdansk on the Baltic coast.
It's 30 years since the first free elections in Poland.
We must get to Gdansk in time for the celebrations in the Solidarity Center.
After all, solidarity changed the world as we know it. During the Cold War, Poland was in the Eastern Bloc, behind the Iron Curtain. So I, in the West, knew absolutely nothing about Poland.
But to me, it was my home.
We'll be calling at places that you've probably never heard of. We've pulled in here because there's a beautiful monastery over there at Tyniec. And next to it, there's a restaurant where we can have lunch. But over this side of the river, there's a vineyard. I didn't know there were any vineyards. I didn't even know they made wine in Poland. Did you know that, Emma?
I didn't know.
Okay, so it's a difficult choice. What are we going to do? This way, I think. Hi, Anya. Lovely to see you.
Hello, welcome.
Hello,
nice
Anya.
to see
Nice
you.
to see Anya.
Welcome to our beautiful city of Kraków.
Thank you. It is beautiful.
You can easily walk through the city to see the main highlights, the most important tourist attractions. That is the Royal Castle with the watchtowers. You can see that it's actually standing on the natural hill. The city started there, and then it was, of course, growing gradually towards what nowadays is the main square of the city, the biggest medieval square in Europe, which has to be your next stop.
That's right, yes, I remember that. He never remembers our anniversary.
But I have remembered.
You have remembered this morning, yes.
So, and behind me is St. Mary's Basilica, and we're in the market square of Krakow.
Royal City of Kraków. We can say it in two languages now.
Oh, you can.
Witamy w Krakowie.
And we're on the royal route, which kings in the past used to take from somewhere over there, I don't know where they came from, to the castle, which is over there. That means it's half past something. And over here on my right is the clothes hall or the cloth hall? The cloth hall. Yeah, but it seems to be all they sell is trinkets and amber, souvenirs, that sort of thing. It doesn't seem to be selling cloth, but it probably did in the old days.
It did.
We'll see a lot more amber in Gdansk on the Baltic Sea when we get there.
During the Tatar invasions, the castle itself, the Wawel Hill, wasn't destroyed. They never got up there. But what nowadays is the city center, the main square and the surroundings of the main square, that area was burned down, almost completely destroyed. And then in that place, in the 13th century, exactly in 1257, the new main square was established.
And in 1978, UNESCO declared this a World Heritage Site because the layout hasn't changed since the 13th century. This is the Barbican, and it was built as a defensive structure against attacks from the Ottoman Empire and the Archduke of Austria. You can see it has a drawbridge over, it would have been a drawbridge, and it would have been over this moat, which would have been full of water. And if you got in through that gate with your battering ram, then you had to go in and turn before you could access the next gate with your battering ram. In the meantime, you would have been being fired upon by men with bows and arrows or whatever they had in those days. And the object of the game was to get in through that gate, the Florianska gate. But you couldn't. However, You can, of course, get through the gate quite easily today, and on the other side you'll be greeted by this fabulous view of the main drag down to the main square. And if you look behind you, you'll see all these paintings. Originally, it would have been students from the Academy of Fine Arts who displayed their paintings here, but the tradition is carried on and now it's private galleries.
Another thing would be, of course, St. Mary's Church, Virgin Mary's Basilica with the altar of White Stoss. The amazing tradition here in Krakow, we have the trumpeter every hour on an hour playing the bugle call. In Polish we call it hejnał, from one of the towers of St. Mary's Church. Initially it was just being played to wake up people in the morning, open the city gates and close the city gates, but later on, of course, well, the melody, the sound of melody and the length of melody, it's quite different than other cities. Here in Krakow, hejnał is actually cut in a mid-tone at the end. Yes, it ends very rapidly, and that it's because of the fact that in the 13th century, during the invasion of Tatars, the trumpeter who was playing the melody to encourage people to fight against the enemies was killed. One single arrow pierced his throat, and that's why melody always stops in a mid-tone at the end.
Okay, well, we've got to have a listen to that. Is there a best time to hear it?
Well, I would definitely recommend in the middle of the night when the main square is empty and you can hear perfectly, and of course you have this amazing feeling that trumpeter plays just for you. If you want to experience with hundreds of other people, well, noon will be the best time.
69, 70, got 203 left. The job of playing the hejnał is reserved for firemen because the original tower was used by firemen to spot fires. Why are you puffing and panting about?
I've just run 270 something steps.
Each fireman works a 24-hour shift and then has 2 days off. He plays the entire tune that you've just heard once out of each of 4 separate windows in the tower. And he waves to the crowd after playing at each of those windows. And afterwards, if you're up in the tower with him, he's very amenable to having a selfie taken. Goodness knows how many he's had taken with him.
Maybe there was exchange between cities, you know, there was some...
Yeah.
Oh, look at this.
So this is the arrow that cut the throat of the trumpet player. Perhaps.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah,
Well.
Wow.
So somebody in Mongolia heard about the legend.
Yeah, Austria. No.
You wouldn't get that out in a hurry if that went in your back.
Yes,
Super. And the feather.
And a quill.
Looks like eagle's feather. Looks like eagle's feather.
On a nice day, Krakow is an absolute magnet for tourists from near and far, whether you're a local or a foreigner. It is just a fascinating place to visit. Warm, friendly, lots of fabulous food and great things to see. From this vantage point, with a good pair of binoculars, on a good day, you can see the Tatra Mountains about 50 miles away.
Behind me there is Krakow's Mount, which is resting place of the legendary King Cracow, the founder of city of Krakow. Both Wanda Mount and Cracow Mount are the only prehistorical sites in Krakow. So we are actually standing on the oldest man-made structure in Krakow.
I love dogs, and dogs love me. Dogs generally love their owners, and this particular dog loved its owner. So much so that when his owner died of a heart attack on a roundabout just across the river there, that when the ambulance took his owner away, the dog stayed there. But the dog stayed there for 12 months, living on snacks provided by passers-by who knew the story. And eventually, Jock, the dog, he was persuaded to be adopted by somebody. It's a tragic story, and Krakowians took to this dog, Jock, and they erected this lovely statue to him, which was created by the same sculptor who created the dragon statue, which we're going to go and have a look at next. The legendary Krakow dragon burst after drinking too much water to put out the fire in its belly. Today, it does this every 5 minutes. But it's much more impressive at night. In fact, the whole of Krakow is impressive at night. It's beautifully lit, and many of the buildings that you would walk past without really noticing in the daytime are, well, they just come to life at night time. So, Eva, why was that mass being held at 21:37?
It's very moving what I just read, that this last mass in the city, and it starts 21:37, which was exactly the time when John Paul II died, and everyone in Poland knows that number. That was heartbreaking for me and for everyone in Poland, everyone who loved him around the world. We are standing not far away from the place where he used to live as a bishop. I took the nearest flight, and within a few days I was here in Poland. I had to be here. I wanted to be close to Kraków, to Poland, to Pope. I just came for 2 days, and I was here with about 2 million people.
2 million people?
Yeah.
And the population of Krakow is only 1 million.
1 million.
So 2 million people came.
Yes, he was incredible person, incredible leader, spiritual leader, for not only for Catholics but for everyone around the world. Krakow was in his heart. That was his hometown, and that was the place I wanted to be, and I was here, and exactly on this square. The window which we are just behind you, that's the window when he appeared during his first pilgrimage to Poland. He could be very jolly, and he got such a great connection with young people, and that's became a tradition. Every time he came to visit Poland, he would come and stand in that window and have conversation with young people, and sometimes he would say, "Okay, let me go, I need to go to bed." So we've got those 3 anniversaries: 100 years of independence, we've got 30 years of fall of communism, and 15 years when Poland joined the European Union, and 40 years since the first pilgrimage of John Paul II, who was instrumental in those changes.
So here we are in the Kazimierz district, the Jewish district of Krakow. This was occupied by the Jews for about 500 years, who lived and prospered here under the protection of King Casimir the Great, because they were a nation without a state. They didn't have any land. And it's always been like that for Jewish people, and they prospered for over 500 years. But then there was the Holocaust, and because they were all here, they were easy to round up, and the Nazis took them all away and killed them. The place fell into disrepair during the communist era because there was nobody here to look after it all. But now it's all being refurbished. There's that street there, it's completely refurbished. This street, as you can see, is about to be refurbished. But this is just typical of what's going on in Poland at the moment. Lots and lots of refurbishment. But over here we have the Okrągłak, I think that's the right pronunciation, where you can get the best zapiekanki in, shall we say, Krakow. Because somebody in Warsaw might say, oh no, we do the best ones. Anyway, they're very nice and I've had one before, so I'm not going to have another one. And behind me we have a famous pub called the Alchemia. During the communist time it was a very dodgy district to ever visit, but after 1989 and in the 90s it was all rediscovered and it's got a great life now.
When Kazimierz was established in the 14th century as a separate city, it was established on an island between two branches of the Vistula River. One of them later on dried out, was turned to a street, so now we can easily cross from the old town to Kazimierz, but in the past, in Middle Ages especially, well, it was a little harder. There was only one bridge connecting both cities, Kraków and Kazimierz.
I'm standing in front of the house where Helena Rubinstein spent her childhood. She was the oldest of 8 daughters and she moved to Australia when she was a young woman. In Australia, she started her cosmetic business. She moved to America and she gradually built her cosmetic empire. One of the vital ingredients of her creams was lanolin, and lanolin came from sheep, and where she lived in Australia, there was 75 million sheep, so you could have abundance of lanolin. She invented the first moisturizing cream, the first waterproof mascara, the first beauty institute. She was a smart businesswoman. In late 1920s, she sold her business for over $7 million and she bought it back for less than $1 million after the Great Depression. I don't think many people knew that she was born just here in the Jewish district Kazimierz in Kraków.
I certainly didn't know that Nigel Kennedy, the famous British violinist, lives in Krakow. And neither did I know that Joseph Conrad, the famous British author, wrote lots of excellent sailing books in the 19th century and is buried in Canterbury, is actually Polish and comes from Krakow.
How was that possible? That nobody destroyed the city? Yes, we had initially Austrian partition and then Nazi invasion and then communism, so Soviets were here. Well, the thing with Krakow was nobody wanted to destroy it. Everybody wanted to have it. Yes, Nazis turned it to a German city. They even changed the name to Cracow. Yes, during the time of Austrian partition. Also, it was the Royal City of Kraków. Yes, it was a small city, but still very important.
So I'm standing in front of the Jagiellonian University, which was founded in 1364 by King Casimir the Great, the Third. And I used to be a builder's merchant, and so I recognise a quality building when I see one. And this is very Teutonic in nature, and it has the most amazing brickwork. It's so flat and so clean. I'm flabbergasted. If that was built in 1364, that is amazing. And Copernicus studied here, and his documents, all his calculations and things like that, they're all kept here. You can't see them, but you can get them online. But every 500 years or so, they get them out for the public to have a look at. And there's a monument here of Copernicus. And who else studied here? One of the kings, Jan Sobieski, whose great-grandson was Bonnie Prince Charlie. We'll hear more about Jan Sobieski later. And John Paul II, who became the Pope. He wasn't called John Paul II then. Who was he called, Emma? I can't pronounce that. Karol Wojtyła. Okay. And he was a bishop here in Krakow. So, it's a very significant building, not just for its architecture, but for the people who studied here. In modern times, there are over 40,000 students here and 4,000 teachers or professors or whatever they like to call themselves. So one of the sadder stories that happened here at the Jagiellonian University was that in 1939, 187 or so professors and intelligent scientific people were invited to a lecture by a German officer. and they were rounded up and taken away to a concentration camp. They didn't expect it, it was a trap. The youngest teachers didn't survive, but Mussolini even thought this was a shocking thing for the Germans to have done. And in early 1940, the older ones were released. But in the meantime, education went underground, and students were secretly educated outside of the university, and education continued despite what the Germans were trying to do.
Early 1990s, there was a big wave of especially American tourists coming here because of the Schindler's List, which was filmed here. And now a lot of those people return to Krakow, and well, they say the change is so huge. Yes, from the simple things like the amount of shops and the amount of restaurants.
Now, one of the legacies of the Soviet era is a certain thriftiness, and this thriftiness manifests itself in the form of table napkins. Not all restaurants use napkins this small and thin, and indeed some of them are very luxurious, but it's quite common to find them cut in half. Something like this would be cut in half or even into quarters to make them go further. But this doesn't detract from the quality of the food that you can get. Of course, rowing clubs are of great interest to us. This one is one of the major ones on the River Wisła and has produced world champions, and I dare say a lot of them have been baby boomers born shortly after the end of communism. Ah yes, communism. The elephant in the room. Once upon a time, there were 365 of these breathtakingly beautiful 16th century tapestries in the Wawel Castle at Krakow. They form part of Poland's heritage, and they've had an interesting life. Some were mortgaged to provide funds for a hapless king, some ended up in the Winter Palace in Russia, and the remainder were squirreled away when the Germans invaded in 1939. They had quite an adventure, sojourning in Romania, taking a brief holiday in Malta before being shipped to Canada. And the Canadians managed to prevent the Polish communists from laying their hands on them again until 1961. There was a lot of secrecy and subterfuge, and now only 136 remain. But you can come and see them here at the Wawel Castle in Krakow, where they belong. This beautiful palace was commissioned at the behest of King Casimir III, or otherwise known as Casimir the Great, who was a larger-than-life character who famously found Poland in wood but left it in stone. And it passed down through lots of generations till eventually King Sigismund III Vasa, who was King of Sweden and King of Finland and King of Lithuania, or Duke, he was in charge of a lot of places. He decided he was going to move the royal court from Krakow here to Warsaw, and of course the easiest way to get it there was down the River Wisła. But it took 13 years. Well, you can imagine, if you were trying to take your large screen TV or your piano downstream on a wooden raft pushed by men with poles, then it would take a long time, wouldn't it? What you have to remember is that back in those days there were no locks on the river at all, and so it was very shallow, and that's why you had to pole these flat-bottom boats around to transport things on the River Wisła. But to get to Warsaw on the Wisła, you have to pass by Sandomierz, and that's where we're heading to next.
Next time we interviewed the president of Sandomierz, and we discovered all sorts of amazing things we didn't know.
4,500 years ago. We didn't know anything about this before we came here, did we? But there's a massive flood that is threatening our whole expedition. It's no different to Stereo 8. It's nicer than champagne. Ahoy-Boats sponsors great continental river journeys. If you enjoyed this first episode of our documentary series, then please give us a thumbs up and leave a comment. They really help. And sharing, that helps even more. And finally, subscribe to this channel so that YouTube can let you know when the next episode is going to be available.